So, as you were talking, gents, I was pulling up on my phone. What's the death toll? Because we're constantly hearing what the death toll is, and the narrative that is repeated over and over again would go against what you're saying, that civilian deaths are minimized. So, Al Jazeera, 1 million in harm's way in Gaza City as Israel escalates attacks. They also say 65,000 people have been killed, 167,000 injured. PBS, 60,000 Palestinians have died. Um, and where else? Oh, UNICEF, 50,000 children have been killed. So 65,000 people are dead, and 50,000 of them are children, according to a United Nations organization that clearly doesn't have the facts. So uh, when you've looked at civilian deaths in this war as compared to others, what have you found?
I could go for a while on that if you want to take a shot at it.
I can go for a couple of hours if you'd like to take over after that.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say is I don't think anybody knows how many civilians have died inside Gaza. I certainly don't. You hear these 65,000 figure or 100,000, wherever it might be. And as John pointed out earlier on, these figures all come from Hamas, the Gaza Health Ministry or whatever. And they're all regurgitated from those Hamas figures. And some people quote the UN's figures, say, yes, follow it. But the UN's figures come from Hamas. Everyone's figures come from Hamas. So we don't know the reality. What we do know is that a large number of civilians have died, or a large number of people, shall we say, have died inside Gaza. And some of those are civilians. The IDF have estimated, at various points, they've estimated the number of terrorist fighters that they've killed inside Gaza. There's not a kind of I don't think I haven't seen a figure recently from the IDF, but there's occasionally they will say they estimate the following have been killed. But the reality is, on the basis of the IDF figures I've seen, if you take the Hamas figures as being something like the truth, and I'm not saying they are because they're probably not, they're probably grossly exaggerated, then you have to deduct from those figures, the total figures they give you, have to deduct the number of fighters that have been killed, because obviously IDF are going to have killed a lot of fighters. They've been targeting the fighters, not the civilians, and many fighters will have died.
Are they, when they put out these figures, they're counting all the fighters as civilians, aren't they?
Well, yeah. I mean, Hamas are counting everybody in that equation. They don't differentiate between fighters and combatants. Fighters and civilians. They just give an overall figure. Nor do they say how many people have died from natural cause. And in a population of 2 million or whatever it is that Gaza is supposed to have had at the beginning of the conflict, I don't know how many, but a large number are going to have died of natural causes: old age, heart attacks, cancer, some kind of condition unconnected with the war. Now that's all included in the overall equation. But as a very, very rough rule of thumb, from what I can work out, and I'm not suggesting for a moment this is accurate, and I don't think anyone has an accurate figure, I would guess that the number of civilians that have been killed in this conflict are probably fewer than 50% of the overall total. So you're probably talking about a ratio maybe 1-to-1 civilian to combatants killed. Which sounds terrible. It does sound terrible when you're talking about a war that's aimed to kill combatants only.
But if is that normal?
Right. Well, I was going to say, if you compare it to other conflicts, I think the Americans in Afghanistan estimated they killed something in the region of 5 civilians to 1 combatant, and in Iraq, something like 3 civilians to 1 combatant. So when you're fighting it among a civilian population, civilians, tragically and unfortunately, they're going to die. There's no way around it. Some of them are going to die. And more of them are going to die in this kind of conflict when Hamas actually wants them to die. I don't think in Afghanistan and Iraq, maybe with some exceptions, or other combat zones, that the people supposedly fighting against the Americans or whatever actually wanted their own civilians to die, particularly. Some couldn't care less. But in Hamas's case, they want the civilians to die. It's one of their key operational strategies, is to want those civilians to die. And if I'm right, and Israel has achieved something like a 1-to-1 ratio, maybe a bit different to that. But if I'm right, then that is, probably a historic low in a conflict of this sort. And I before John jumps in on me and has a go, I would say as well that there has been no conflict of this sort before. So it's not really comparable to other theaters.
So, Brian, I could go on for a very long time, and somehow I became like a numbers guy about this ratio. I can say with strong conviction that question, what is your civilian to combatant ratio, has never been raised in any war against any nation, defending themselves or not. You don't say that about any war that's going on right now. Can I give you all the numbers in the comparisons? Sure. But there's 3 types of lies in my work. And I've been doing this for a long time. And I actually write case studies where I search for the number. And there's 3 types of lies in my work: lies, damn lies, and statistics. Just on what the statistics you gave, of course, we can ask the question of like, it doesn't even say combatants or Hamas. It just says this number of Palestinians have died. And until they give me the list of died of natural causes, I'm going to start questioning the number. As a war researcher, I can tell you there's never been a battle. And there's a big difference between a battle and a war where somebody had a daily running number of the people who have died, period, let alone combatants, non-combatants, a daily running number of who's dying day to day, down to the single digit like Hamas can magically do. It just never happened for a whole list of reasons on, let alone who's counting the body. I was like, okay, that body, that was a Hamas guy, that it was an innocent civilian. Or what Hamas was doing, which was taking social media posts of people missing that their families couldn't find. They opened a Google share drive where you could put somebody's name on it. They go to the list. I want people to get out of this numbers game. It's not how war works. The number one question that if I was a politician looking at these numbers would say, okay, this is awful. What is Israel doing to prevent civilian death? Okay, more than anybody else in history. Okay. Is there any evidence of Israel violating the laws of war and targeting civilians? As in, that's their objective. That's where they shot at. The answer is no. Okay, let's look at the legitimate targets that they're engaging. And then what measures did they take to limit civilian deaths? Yes, Brian, I can give you all the statistics that you want, like the Korean War, where 2 million civilians die and less than 100,000 combatants. 2 million civilians, that's 54,000 civilians dying a month, every month of the Korean War, if we did the numbers that way, but it's not how it works. These numbers, even the aggregating of the numbers, and that's what they're doing in Gaza, right? So if I took the Battle of Rafah, right, the whole all eyes on Rafah, don't go to Rafah, where Israel did all the same civilian harm mitigation measures that they have since October 7th, if you looked at just those numbers, it would be 100 combatants to 1 civilian death. The numbers are so low of civilian deaths in Rafah that nobody wants to talk about. They just want to aggregate all the numbers from October 7th because they're counting Palestinian terrorists who died in Israel on October 7th in their list. They just aggregate the number and say, look at this number. Of course, it's awful. And then they'll do the kids thing, right? Because this is where I get into arguments of John, 20,000 children. I'm like, one, if you take itemize Hamas's list, it doesn't have that many children by your definition of children, which is 18 and below. And look, I joined the military. I know Richard did a long time ago. At a very young age, when I was 17, I would have been on the list had I died in this war. It's just, it disregards all facts and takes a number and tries to make that the social problem. Irrelevant of, 200,000 to die in the Iraq war, 400,000 Yemen, like all these other numbers, but the comparisons don't work, right? Because they're war versus battle. What Hamas is doing, Hamas has killed thousands of civilians. 20% of the 15,000 rockets that Hamas has launched have landed inside of Gaza, killing Gazan civilians who go on the list. Everybody just blames Israel for this number. It's not true. The number's not true. It could be more. It could be less. I can tell you that I don't mourn the death of Hamas combatants. I don't. Israel views every civilian casualty as as tragic, as like awful. Hamas views it as their strategy, and they state they want the death. They don't state that they don't want it. They want the death of every child, elderly person, everything, so they can achieve their goal in the afterlife.
I'll just tell you a brief story from a previous conflict.
Sure.
I think it was the 2014 Gaza war, when Hamas put out figures similar, okay, obviously on much smaller scale, but they put out the figures. And effectively, their figures were that all the people that Israel had killed had been civilians. And there was then an uproar after the conflict was finished. There was an uproar among the Gazan population. We thought Hamas was there to protect us, but Hamas didn't lose any fighters in this war. It was all civilians. And Hamas then put out a revised version admitting that they had lost quite a large number of their fighters and reducing the civilian death toll. So this is the kind of thing that we're having to deal with. It's really anything that comes out of Hamas, whatever it says, I think really ought to be just ignored.
October 17th, 2023, Gaza officials say 500 killed in Israeli airstrike on hospital. That was Palestinian Jihad rocket that missed its target. And by the way, 500 people still didn't die. It landed in a parking lot. I'm not sure if anybody died in that strike. But the whole world was told that 500 had died. Our then Foreign Affairs Minister, Melanie Joly, denounced that, and it's still up on her X feed. She has never taken that down. There's a bunch of politicians in Canada who denounced Israel for a war crime and killing 500 people who never died.
Yeah, and if you remember that event, I remember it very vividly. It wasn't just Hamas, like the Gaza Health Ministry spokesman unit that said that. The actual doctors of that hospital, the Ahali Hospital, held a news conference that night before the world could see the explosion, which was a pothole in the parking lot. They held a news conference where they emptied the morgue of anybody dead and had men holding babies in front of them as they gave a news conference talking about the hundreds that had just been killed in the strike that hit the hospital. But then, of course, everything that comes out of anybody in Gaza is taking over the word of reality, even satellite images on that case. But I remember vividly this emotional news conference that the doctors gave with men holding babies at the base of the thing. Who does that?